This is the OnStage Blog Theater podcast. We're excited to join you once again. My name is Greg Ehrhardt. I'm part of the editorial staff of OnStage Blog and onstageblog.com. And then, of course, joining me today is the founder of OnStage Blog and the birthday man coming up in a couple days from this recording, Mr. Chris Peterson. Chris, how you doing?
Hello, hello. I'm turning, it's not every day that a young man turns 21 years old. So it
Sure.
is,
Yeah, you look
uh,
every bit of it. Let me just tell you that.
thank you. Yes, glorious celebration week coming up as I celebrate my
Yeah.
another trip around the sun. So,
Yeah, so it's been exciting times on the blog. We've generated some really good content, generated a lot of good discussion. We love seeing the comments, and overall, it's kind of why we do what we do for a couple of reasons. One is we like to shine a spotlight on different issues that affect community and regional and obviously Broadway theater, but also we want to have, we truly believe our readers are the smartest theater fans in the country, and we love seeing your comments. You educate us. We try to do our best to, if we can't educate you, we want to try at least entertain. So that's our goal. And so it's been a really busy couple months on the blog, and we just started rolling with sort of this latest version of the podcast, where this version of the podcast is just Chris and I talking theater. We also have Rachel Wagner talking theater. She'll be hosting her own sort of podcast, also on the Onstage Blog Theater Network. She just did a really good Tony's recap, the 77th Tony Awards recap with Mark Bonanni. Really good, so check that out. It's also on this feed, both on YouTube and on your podcast networks under the Onstage Blog Theater podcast. Our last episode that we did, we talked about, we addressed our critics. So we kind of went through and we aggregated some of the top complaints that people have about OnStage Blog. This is over the years, not just the last couple of months, but over now 10 years that we've done this blog, and we responded. So it's a really good and hopefully informative, entertaining podcast. We wanted to expand on one of those criticisms on this podcast, which is, and it's our biggest one, which is we talk too much about authentic casting. And what do we mean by that? Chris, I'll let you go a little bit more into details, but broad strokes, certain plays should cast authentically to the character that's portrayed on stage, whether it's by the playwright's intent or how it's traditionally been done. And we pound the table on that for certain plays, but we'll get to. There's certain plays where they've always been, they're supposed to be cast like, is it Miss Saigon? That's Asian cast, or at least some of it's Asian cast that we've seen an all white performance of. We've pounded the table of the blog saying, cut this out, stop doing it. If you don't have Asian actors, don't do the play, do something else. And Chris, I think this is your experience as well. Um, Authentic casting is the one thing I get um, told about in person from friends of mine and people I meet who find out what I do. They tell me, you guys talk way too much about this. And it's the one single thing they tell me in person. And I find that interesting because I think, you know, first of all, no one else is talking about it, so we should. I think more people are starting to talk about it, and I think we'll take some credit for that, to be honest, because we were talking about it way before anybody else was. Um, but there's a lot of interesting but important issues going on with authentic casting. Chris, tell us why you think it's really important for certain shows. We'll get into which shows and shows that doesn't matter. Why authentic casting matters for certain shows, just broad strokes, big picture.
yeah, well, I think when you're, the first part of it is it's kind of like two-pronged. The first is obviously the author's intent. And, when these writers are creating shows and material to shine a light on whether it's a marginalized community, whether it's a community that needs to have, representation and more authentic storytelling, um, you want to honor that author's intent and not go completely against what the purpose of what the show or the stories that they're trying to tell and what kind of materials in that show. And then secondly, when you're talking about shows that you just mentioned like a Miss Saigon, where having Asian performers, preferably, to be quite honest with you, I mean, if you want to get even more specific, South Asian performers of Vietnamese, Filipino descent, because let's be honest, there's a huge difference between a Filipino and a Japanese actor. Um, that there is a certain level of authenticity of understanding the perspective of those people, understanding traditions, understanding language, plight, all those different things that go into that, that an actor of a different race, identity, ethnicity, gender, would not be able to really portray accurately, no matter how good of a performer they are. And I've seen many a performer, from local theaters to professional theaters, that, if I just do this accent, it'll be authentic. It'll come off as that, exactly what it is supposed to. And they always fall short. And, to your point earlier, when you said, like, there's some people that say we talk about this too much and things like that. I mean, you hit the nail on the head. Yes, we do. We're the only ones that do it. So yeah, sadly, like, when you're the only one that's doing it, you got to keep doing it. But to your point, I take full credit for the wave of people getting it right, the wave of content that is sharing our agreement in certain things about saying, like, yes, like, we need to change these things and whatnot. And when we've been doing this blog for 10 years, and it literally was the first things that we talked about 9 years ago on the blog, we're starting to see that tide change, and we've been directly responsible for official acts of licensing for certain shows like Hairspray, to ensure that they are accurately portrayed going forward. But to your point earlier, seldom does a month go by, seldom does a year go by where, after all the work that we've done, after all the discussion that's been had, we're still getting notified of productions both domestically here in the US and internationally that aren't doing that. I just got an email today on Instagram about a production of Evita that apparently has an incredibly white cast. Now, Evita is a different animal altogether of a show of how to cast that, but still, it's like, this is on people's minds. So
Yeah.
we're making it work.
Yeah, the bar's raised. It's just not sufficient to put on the show and enjoy it. Like, I think the bar is, to properly understand the show as well as enjoy it, the casting should be as authentic as possible. We want to live and breathe what's on stage. I do want to get into, because actually the focus of the show is not just get into shows that should be authentically cast, but also, because we get a little bit of bad rap that we think every show should be authentically cast, every show must be diverse, every show. I've even been told, like, you guys don't think white people should be in any Broadway show, which I just laugh at. Because, as we'll get to later, we put an editorial that made a lot of people mad about that we said should only be cast with white people. We'll reveal what that show is later. But the purpose of the show is we want to get into a couple shows that we think should be authentically cast. A couple shows, it really doesn't matter how you cast it, even if there's been some precedent as far as what type of actors have portrayed it. And then shows where it really, frankly, it should only be portrayed by white people on stage. So, Chris, I want to start off this conversation. Let's start off with some shows that we really feel should be authentically cast, that some people just don't think so. Like, there's some shows that I think are pretty obvious. I think you mentioned when we were not recording, like Raisin in the Sun. Like, I think everyone agrees that should be authentically cast. There's not too much debate about that. That would be really weird if that's a white person, show, and there'd be no meaning in that whatsoever. I'm sure, by the way, if you've seen a white only version of Raisin in the Sun, send it to us. There's a YouTube
Please
link.
tell us. Yes. Oh my God.
Um,
Oh,
but there's some shows where there's debate, and the first one, and this is the show that I get asked about a lot in person, especially when we've run editorials in the past, is Hamilton. So there's a lot of debate that it really doesn't matter, whether white people are cast in certain roles. Some people have referenced the Manuel Miranda quote saying he envisioned the play as it could be anybody that plays it, any race, any creed, any sex. Um, Chris, we've been on record as saying this should be authentically cast based on how essentially the original Broadway cast was done. Can you explain why? Can you explain the editorial position of why?
yeah, it's funny. Like, Hamilton is always brought up by people to defend whitewashing. It's like, well, if this black person could play this role, then, or if Hamilton is allowed, then white people should be able to play whatever role they want. Whitewashing should be fine. No, that point, and that's when people that tells me when people have missed the entire point of what Hamilton is about. Hamilton is
Hmm.
a
Yeah.
reimagination of the founding of our country through the eyes of marginalized communities, Black communities, Latino communities,
Okay.
because to demonstrate points of inequities as well as universalities of things that are universal with all of us as Americans. So to show it doesn't matter if it was white men making certain decisions in life, and things like that. It's just people. It's Americans, and so the point, and you only get those points by casting a diverse cast. If you cast that with all white people, the point is lost entirely. I think what's going to be interesting is I would be willing to wager that within the next 10 years, Hamilton's licensing will be available for community theaters and high schools and things like that. And
Mhm.
that's when OnStage Blog will be celebrating our 20th year, and we are going to be cooking with whitewash productions of Hamilton, I am sure. But
Seeing it already. We're already seeing illegal
we're already
productions
seeing illegal
of
productions.
Hamilton, white only. Yeah.
But I think what's going to happen is you're going to see when they do release licensing, I hope that Lin-Manuel Miranda and the other creators will put extensive notes and casting note descriptions in that to ensure that these casts are diverse because it's the entire point of the story.
Yeah, yeah, and I completely agree. One thing I wanted to get into with you was we published an article about whether white people should audition w- with Hamilton songs. And do you remember this? I think it was
Yeah,
I think it was an editorial or guest editorial from someone who said don't stop doing it.
don't do it.
Uh, right, and this generates a lot of conversation. I'll be honest, I'm a little bit more on the fence about this because it's just for me, it's like, it's just an audition. Like it's they're just showing off their range, their chops. The only thing I would say is I want to get your opinion. This is I'm just voicing my own kind of thoughts on this. The only thing I would say is just know who you're auditioning for, because if those are people who maybe have stated position or be like, yeah, you should, you know, that play should be out of bounds. You know, the song should be out of bounds. Or white people, you should know that and sing and choose your songs accordingly. Chris, what is your take about just using Hamilton songs in your audition as your audition material?
It's funny. I remember that our editorial that it came out, and it was as controversial reaction as I imagined it would get. I just for the record, folks, I did not write it. It was a guest editorial. Um, And the point that they were making was that, yeah, like you should even be authentic in the audition process. So, and they used Hamilton as an example. The problem is with Hamilton, there isn't a lot of material in there that I think it's interesting. It's like definitively needs to be sung by a Black performer. It's the visual of the performance that adds the element. But if a white person sang in an audition, it's not like, so if they sang One Last Time, or if they sang
Quiet
Wait for It, it's
Uptown,
Quiet Uptown, like there's
Wait
nothing in
for It.
there.
Yeah.
Exactly. Now,
All beautiful song, right? All tremendous songs. Yeah.
beautiful, absolutely. Now here's the flip side, but I do think in auditions there are certain songs that are absolutely off limit if you're not that race. So I remember
Mhm.
doing an audition, and a young white man came in and sang Wheels of a Dream from Ragtime, which is all about overcoming like civil rights issues and discrimination. And you're watching this, no disrespect, but white as the snow young man singing this song, it just looked horrendous. Like it was just
Yeah.
an awful picture. So Hamilton, I think, is fine. But other songs like from Ragtime or Hairspray, and like,
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm not gonna see a white girl sing "A Change Is Gonna Come" from Hairspray. Like that just is goofy. But I've seen it, and so like, yeah,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
it's those things. Yeah.
Okay. All right, fair enough. So a couple other musicals and plays. I know Chris, you wanted to hit on. One was In the Heights, like that should be authentically cast.
Yep.
That is a play about the uniquely Hispanic experience. We've seen some whitewash plays of In the Heights. It's just frankly silly, and I just don't understand why they choose that play. Because there would be nothing that could possibly it would resonate. Was it Australia that I think that we
Oh
saw?
my God, it's everywhere. So like
Okay.
Australia did a very famous whitewash production that really, if you want to look at the history of OnStage blog and say like what are some of the biggest like pieces that we've ever done that had a global impact, like that was one of them. But famously, I mean, here's the controversy about In the Heights that people need to understand because it is a little confusing. For school productions, from like middle school, high school productions, Lin-Manuel Miranda and the other writer whose name I apologize, I'm forgetting off the top of my head, have said they're okay with any race of population playing those roles because
Mhm.
it's school and they look at it as an educational tool. Now, where that ends is when you get into college and you get into professional productions and things like
Okay.
that. And that's where we still see it today, where it's like, no, that like you can't do it. I would say this to any school out there that even though you can, doesn't mean you should. And you
Mhm.
should go if as a cautionary tale, go on YouTube and just look up school production of In the Heights. And there's a private school in Vermont that decided to do In the Heights one year with all white kids, and it is a disaster. Like, I don't want to make fun of kids, but you can just see like this is why you don't do this with an all white cast, period,
Mhm.
at a
Mhm.
school level. So there you go.
Yeah. And then let's go a little bit quickly, not just because of the subject matter, but just we want this episode to end at a reasonable time. A couple other examples you wanted to bring up along a different, so not based on race, but one was based on creed. Fiddler on the Roof.
Yeah.
This is a little bit of interesting take you have. The Fiddler on the Roof should be authentically cast with Jewish people. You want to explain why?
It's there's a lot of plays out there that have Jewish characters where the language, the traditions, the history, uh literally the traditions, and as in Fiddler on the Roof, are so vital to the story that you need in order to protect its accuracy, its respect, it should be played by an all Jewish cast. I remember seeing a production of it at a Catholic high school in Connecticut, and it was like I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Versus, and not to pit a high school production versus a Broadway production, but the recent Broadway revival with Danny Burstein in 2015, 2016, miraculously through casting mysteries, they were able to get an entirely Jewish cast
Hmm.
in that production, and it was by far the most beautiful production of that show I've ever seen because of that. And so that cemented my feelings on it, where it's like, no, you gotta have it's either got to be an all Jewish cast, majority Jewish cast. If you're doing it without, you've got to bring in a rabbi, you've got to bring in people from that community to educate and things like that, because it is so important in that story to get that stuff right because there's so much
Yeah.
language being used. You can't butcher it, you can't fake it. It's so important. And we see a lot of shows like that, but Fiddler, yeah, like in a Jewish like religion and culturally, like that needs to be played by all Jewish cast from here on out.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think yeah, and what I would also say you brought up about can and should. This is where I come in and emphasize the should. You know, even if the casting is open, um, leave it open. Like this is the dream role of a Jewish actor, to play this part, and it would be an awesome experience for the audience as well. So there's plenty of other roles for non-Jewish lead roles. You're going for. Um, let them have, and that's not just let them have it. It's just it's best for theater,
Yeah,
to step aside, even
yeah,
if you have a
yeah.
chance to, even if the director's telling you, you know what, fine, go ahead. If you're the best, I'm going to cast you. Step aside, take another role, take a lesser role at least. That's still a step forward regardless. All right, last example in this category, Chris, you want to talk about love, valor, and compassion as far as authentic casting when it comes to sexuality. Please
Yeah.
elaborate.
I mean, this has become an ongoing discussion topic now that we're talking about casting representation and authentic casting is what about sexuality and sexual orientation and should gay characters only be played by gay actors and should straight roles only be played by, excuse me, straight people? It's I look at it as a case by case basis, a show by show basis. Um, Shows that, you know, I feel based on the text that there is flexibility, there is opportunities for people of different sexual orientations to play those roles. Should. That's fine. A play like Love, Valor, and Compassion, which for those of you who don't know, it's a brilliant play, very famous play in the gay community that really was one of the first Broadway productions in the midst of the AIDS crisis to come to Broadway and really like tackle a lot of those subject matter and things like that. It kickstarted the career of like people like Jason Alexander and others, on Broadway. Is so embedded in the gay community. There are scenes in there that are both incredibly hilarious, incredibly heartbreaking, but if played by someone who is straight, um, it it looks and feels kind of icky, like they're doing uh like a stereotype, or they're making the gay. I was about to say gayness, which is not the right word you want to use, but like you're making
Yeah.
that a kind of a butt of a joke. And for those of you who don't like, if you're trying to come up with if you're trying to imagine what I'm talking about, imagine watching the movie The Birdcage and knowing that both Robin Williams and Nathan Lane are straight people. I mean, looking back on that movie 30 years later, it might be offensive, but Nathan Lane is gay, and so that came from a place of authenticity. Um, but it's one of those things. So that's one of those shows where
Yeah.
I'm like, based on what's inside the text, really does call for a all gay cast.
Yeah, I do have to say, I think movies are a different animal because movies have to sell tickets, and who sells tickets? Stars, box office stars sell tickets, and I think you have room to do authentic casting when the star is the franchise, that sort of thing. But when it's, sort of a new story, new script, you need stars. It's very hard to say, well, you got authentically cast this. Great. This movie's going to make $1,000 at the box office if I cast it that way. So I personally have a little more leniency towards movies when it comes to authentic casting. But I totally know what you're saying. With as far as Love, Vow, and Compassion goes. All right. As we teased, we're going to talk about some shows where you don't need authentic casting. Let's start with shows that doesn't really matter who you cast, all white, all black, all any race, sex, creed, all women, all. We have a few examples here, Chris. Let's start with Guys and Dolls. Guys and Dolls, even though it's a set a very specific time period, and traditionally has been cast a particular way, you think this can be played by whoever, whenever, doesn't matter. Go ahead, please explain.
Yeah, I mean, the show itself is based on like, not, I don't want to say it's based on a comic strip, but it's based on like short stories from like that time of when it came out. And yes, it takes place during like the 1940s and 50s in New York. Um, but it's not a show that demands historical accuracy. So you can
Hmm.
have a diverse cast. I've seen it with a diverse cast, and it's just as brilliant with a diverse cast as it is with an all-white cast. In fact, famously, they did a Broadway production, I think it was like back in the 80s, with an all black cast, and it worked perfectly.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's a show that like if they cast that diversely, I'd be like, cool. You do it. In fact, I should mention they just did it in the West End in London with a very diverse cast
Yeah.
and it looks fantastic. So that's a show you can do.
And we're also on record, at least in previous episodes, with the show Aladdin, that the genie has traditionally been played by a black character, but that character could be played by whoever you want. Um,
Exactly.
yeah, because again, fictional character, obviously the genie is not a real person. It's a fantasy tale. Go ahead. Do you think the same thing about Aladdin and Jasmine, though, who are
No,
traditionally right? They have to be kind of right, right.
yeah.
But someone like the genie that can be, be funny. Basically, is the main criteria there.
Hmm.
Um, Chris, you want to talk about a couple other ones? Like I know you wanted to talk about Cabaret. That could be cast, however.
I mean, Cabaret, a lot of people wouldn't think Cabaret because it's like, no, wait, it's 1940s Germany. You're in the midst of World War II and it's all those things. Yeah, okay, but the thing with Cabaret is it's a story of paranoia, hate, and that takes many shapes and forms. And I've seen productions of that where the MC is played by a black actor. I've seen Sally Bowles played by an Asian woman. I've seen Herr Schultz played by a Latino and also a black actor. And nothing is lost in the story. Like
Yeah,
at no point in that story is race mentioned and things like that. So it is a show. I mean, yes, Sally Bowles is
it's
a real
sort of
person, but
authentic
like
for time period, right? I mean, it does
sort of,
take
but
place in it. Yeah.
it's when you cast that diversely, which you can, um, it doesn't change the messaging of the show. It doesn't throw you off one bit because of what it delves into. And so, yeah, I would encourage anybody to, again, if I see a diverse production of that, sadly the newest Broadway revival is not, but fine. Um, I would go along with it. I'd be like, yeah, that looks great.
Let's hit on just a couple shows that we think should pretty much be have a white cast, for the most part. And yes, we do believe. I know some people think we don't believe that, but yes. And let's start with 1776. We've actually printed an editorial on this. The comments were wild. The accusations were plentiful. But this is something we stand by, because I'll speak a little bit to this, Chris. Even though, yes, this is a musical, it involves John Adams and our founding fathers singing aplenty, which probably did not happen in actual 1776. As opposed to Hamilton, this is a play that is attempting to be authentic as far as the struggles, the troubles that the founding fathers had in terms of forming their own free country. Um, it, I'm sorry, but like they're talking about slavery a lot during it, and it's a huge issue, obviously. If you have John Adams be black or some other cast other than white, the play just doesn't make sense because part of the core of John Adams' arc is him battling this sort of inherent, not his own personal hypocrisy, but the North's hypocrisy and sort of, Massachusetts hypocrisy, in terms of being slave, in terms of supporting the slave trade. And it just doesn't work, without a white only cast. But yet it requires you being in the room when you're watching these guys on stage debating, arguing with each other, talking about what really truly needs to be free. Chris, your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, it's the point of having it being all white cast, preferably all white men, to be quite honest with you, is good or bad, all white men decided the course of this country. And that is a statement that is very powerful about 1776. And that's why I believe the most recent revival with a diverse cast of female identifying actors failed.
Mm,
And the molasses to rum to slaves number is a perfect example of that
that
when
makes zero
um
sense
when
without being
Rutledge
from white actor. Yep.
when Rutledge is being played by a black actress singing molasses to rum, it makes no. And actually, if you look at some of the news that came out of the show, that was the most controversial number because then you had the other black actors in the show start to portray as if they were slaves, which I, by the way, I've never seen that in any production of 1776,
Right.
but was used here. And the it was awful,
Yeah.
awful. So that's why. Yeah.
I will say, I do think the production could get away with a diverse Ben Franklin, only because he's kind of comic relief. And his role in the founding fathers was less, obviously, he was staunchly anti-slavery and pro-abolition, but his role in that play is less so.
Yeah.
He kind of stays out of that for the most part. So, um,
There was a great Lincoln Center production. You could probably see clips of it where they did like a modern version, so everybody looks like they're like in modern day
oh,
clothes and suits. But interesting enough, all of the black actors and BIPOC actors were northern states.
mm, yeah,
So there you go.
yeah. Yeah, again, I see why they would do that and why it could make sense, but the hypocrisy and the it's just so fundamental to the play. It just loses its meaning, to
Yeah.
me. Let's touch on another one, before we wrap up here. Chris, I don't have an opinion on this yet, so I'm going to let you kind of take the floor on this. Sound of Music, you think should be
Yes.
should should basically be a white cast to keep the meaning of it? Go ahead. Please explain your position.
Well, I think with any show that is a true reenactment of historical events, or you're talking about real people, and it's not some sort of reimagining of who they were as a character, or people, you're not really inventing things about their life. Um, it should be authentically played. And Sound of Music is an example of that. The Von Trapp family are very much real people. And Maria Von Trapp was not black. The Captain Von Trapp was not Asian. Um, there were other elements of their life that made them targets of the Nazi Party, and that is explained in the show.
Yeah.
So years ago, I saw National Tour with a Latino actor cast as Captain Von Trapp, and I said, no, like it doesn't work there. And I wouldn't want it to be a reverse situation where like you're doing a show about a historical person
Right.
who's African American and is being played by a white actor. So
Right.
that's
Right.
one thing about people that don't understand the OnStage blog is that we are nothing but consistent in our beliefs. And so good or bad, if you like it or not, like we are going to be consistent about those types of things. And so yeah, like when I see diverse casts of Sound of Music, which thankfully I don't see very many of them, you just raise a point like, yeah, this is not a show for a black actor. This is not a show for an Asian
Yeah.
actor. It should only be for white people.
So we could go on, and we might in a future episode, but we're gonna leave this here for now. We want to try and make this a really tidy episode that really explains kind of our thought process behind this. Um, if you're gonna comment, please be civil. Some of the comments in this topic on our social networks have been uncivil, so be nice, be constructive. We love for you to weigh in, but obviously be constructive and yeah, and look, like as we said, we're going to be writing more about this topic. We'll be speaking more about this topic, and we may get in a future episode. We may get into a few more examples just to kind of flesh out our thoughts here. Chris, that wraps up this episode. So once again, check us out on OnStage blog on onstageblog.com. Hit subscribe, please. So again, this is a relatively new podcast for us. We'll be doing episodes probably about once a month. I think we're going to take the next month off, but we'll be probably back in August. Unless something huge comes, then we'll definitely do an emergency pod about some breaking news. But Rachel Wagner will continue to be doing episodes talking about theater and then we have a nice little end to June. We've got some really big pieces coming out and some fun stuff we're gonna print. July is looking good as well, so please follow us on Stage Blog on X, Instagram, Facebook. It's on Stage Blog 8213, I think, on YouTube. Am I missing your social media channel, Chris?
No, that's everything.
Okay. So thanks for watching, thanks for listening, and we will catch you in the next episode of the Onstage Blog Theater Podcast.